Welcome back, adventurers. This week we're faced with a dramatic emergency at sea. A young girl is injured and in shock. And as fate would have it, we are anchored directly opposite the scene. Join us in this beautiful Whitsunday Islands of Australia where we tackle this injury head on. Kick off your shoes and come barefoot with us. Warning, please note that graphic medical images are included. We are John and Ellie, the barefoot doctors, sailing and travelling around the globe. Join us as we explore the beauty of the world because life is better barefoot. After packing up and leaving Expedition Barefoot for the last time to be sold in Greece, we're flying back to Australia. But then we're offered a golden opportunity, one magic week sailing through the stunning Whitsunday Islands right off our doorstep in Mackay. How could we say no, especially when the hook is Hill Inlet, one of the most breathtaking anchorages we have ever seen, tucked behind the iconic Whitehaven beach. We make our way to Airlie Beach and step aboard a beautiful Seawind 1250. From here, the adventure begins. Hey guys, well we are here in Airlie Beach and we just feel very honoured because we've been invited to cruise for a week on this beautiful Seawind right here called Harley Girl. And some followers of ours we met in Brisbane just a few weeks ago reached out to us and said, hey, do you want to come out for a sail? We're going out for about a week or so and it'll be really cool. And so we said, you know what, we would love it. So we're very excited and of course we haven't cruised on the Seawind before, so that's going to be a nice experience as well.
It'll be fantastic, yeah.
This place is something else. The sailing is incredible. Dozens of anchorages, uncrowded and serene. Fringed with coral reef and teeming with fish. Most is protected, meaning that the marine life come right up to you and sometimes even feeding straight from your hand. In Manta Ray Bay, we meet giants of the deep, including massive Murray wrasse, swimming among coral and schools of fish. You can hand feed them if you're brave enough. Snorkel through coral gardens and explore eerie underwater statues just beneath the surface. But it's Hill Inlet that calls us back again. We hike a trail and gaze out above. It's more than beautiful. It's surreal, twisting sands and turquoise waters blending like a living painting. And the best part, if you have a shallow draft catamaran, you can sail in just a couple of feet of water, miles inland up the inlet across glassy flat seas. Behind the spit of Whitehaven, you can anchor in a spot that offers a full 360-degree protection, calm as a mirror. As the tide shifts, you get to choose, stay afloat or dry out in sand. Either way, you step off your boat in paradise. The sand here is made of pure silica, powdery soft, and it squeaks beneath your feet. High tide, it traps bubbles beneath the surface, and as you walk, a natural jacuzzi forms around you. And if you lay down and wiggle, you're surrounded by fizzy rising bubbles, simply a perfect peak experience. This isn't just sailing, it's soul-inspiring, and it's right here in our backyard. But little did we know the severe situation that we were about to face.
We are in Nara Inlet, which is in the Whitsunday Islands, a gorgeous little bay or inlets open to the southwest, but we have waterfalls on that side, we have waterfall on that side, we have, include Ellie, we have a cave with Aboriginal paintings in it. And while we were here yesterday, we had a little medical emergency. So what was that, honey?
Well, the two crew, the girls that we were traveling with and one of the owners of the boat went off exploring while we were doing editing for you guys and they came back with another boatload of people. The girl had been walking up the waterfall, slipped, a young girl about mid-20s, slipped and actually cut her hand quite badly here. So she was bundled up and brought to the boat, and so we stopped work and John went to work at cleaning up the wound. It was quite nasty, she was quite distressed, but everyone pulled together and let John do his thing. Guys, we've just had this emergency on board and our troops that were out having a little walk up at the waterfall they collected them. So let's hear the story right from the horse's mouth.
We went for a walk up to the waterfall, and we went in one way and we saw their boat came in a different angle. And so we were coming up and we were thinking, oh, I wonder who's going to get to the waterfall first. And then we're climbing the rocks to get there.
We decided not to actually take that entry to the waterfall because there was quite a lot of rocks with oysters on them. So we decided to go the harder route in the sense of the bigger boulders to go over. So as we got to the top, we were taking our photos and then we noticed they had turned around, and we thought it was very odd that they didn't actually stay long and get their photos.
Yeah.
And that's when we noticed Bridie had her hand up.
We were worried about them, and so we went, okay, we better find out what's going on, make sure they're okay. So we raced back down to our dinghy.
We were trying to call out to them to let them know that Ellie and John were on board our boat, and they thought we were actually calling for help.
But we weren't.
So then he cut the motors a little bit, and I just used one word, doctors, and points, so they knew instead of saying sentences, they could clearly know that we were trying to get a message across to them. Doctors, go that way on board.
Yeah.
So then they got their dinghy over. It was all hands on deck. We were lucky one of their friends was a nurse. Ellie was helping getting the breathing sorted out for Bridie. She was going into a little bit of shock.
Yeah.
So it's kind of stabilising her and stabilising the blood coming out.
It was
as
a very large cut on her hand that she'd cut on an oyster shell.
Yeah, and it was basically sliced quite thick. You could see white flesh in the end and cut through right across the hand.
So at this stage, we were faced with a young lady in significant shock, pale and sweaty, dizzy and looking like she was about to faint. In this situation, the person really needs to be laying down flat on the floor, and because this did not solve the problem immediately, we also got her to elevate her legs to encourage the blood to flow back up to her brain. There was a significant amount of blood loss here too, so the blood flow had to be slowed or stopped, and as you can see, she had a large wrapping around her hand to achieve this, and this had been done at the scene of the injury with her boyfriend's shirt. So this was pretty good first aid from the start, but the other aspect that was making her feel even worse was the severe pain that she was in because the laceration was so deep. She was really reluctant to allow me to open up the dressing to have a look at the wound and see what we were dealing with, because with every movement the pain got worse, and she was also scared more blood would come gushing out. Of course, you have no choice because you have to deal with the wound, and to do this you have to see it. What I was needing to look for to see if there was any arterial squirting of blood from the large arteries, and if this was the case we might have to use a tourniquet higher up the limb to reduce the blood loss. So, as gently as possible, I unwrapped the shirt around her hand to have a look at the wound, and with every movement she winces and groans in pain. I explained that the pain will improve once we can stabilize the wound, because it is the raw edges of the wound rubbing against each other that causes the pain, and once the wound is immobilized with whatever means, the pain will settle down. I have to peel back each finger individually, reassuring her at every step that it will be fine, and eventually I get to see the extent of the wound. The wound is deep, gaping, and extending all the way from the wrist to the web between the ring and the little finger. There is fat and tissue bulging outwards, and where the oysters have cut through the finger web, it is also jagged and irregular. On the positive side though, the cut is clean and straight with no sign of severed arteries, which would normally be identified by squirting blood with pulsations. The other important thing here too that I did was to check there was no damage to the tendons and that all fingers work properly without loss of any movements in either flexion or extension. If any tendons had been damaged, then this would require microsurgery under general anesthetic to stitch the tendons back together again. Came from this finger all the way down to there. It was going along the tendons, not across the tendons, so there wasn't any tendon damage. She could move her fingers properly. But as all movements were fine, the only treatment required here was to repair the skin. So at this point I was able to reassure her that everything was going to be fine and there was nothing complicated to deal with. So as the next step, we looked through the medical kits on both boats, and of course if I had stitches and local anaesthetic I would have been able to do the job properly, but as these were charter boats they basically only had simple first aid with dressings and steri-strips. We looked for skin glue but there wasn't any, and we also looked in the toolboxes of both boats for super glue, which is quite effective to hold the skin edges together. Unfortunately, the one tube of superglue that we found was already hard and dried up, so completely useless for us. So now, of course, the ultimate aim here is to close the wound, to stop the bleeding, and to get the skin edges to close up against each other. But first we need to disinfect the wound and clean it out, and the only sterilizing liquid we had on the boat was alcohol-based, which is particularly nasty because it stings significantly. So for several minutes, Bridie's pain was aggravated by this essential process, and she bravely put up with this part of the procedure, which is the worst of everything. Once cleaned, we then set about applying pressure to limit the bleeding and then trying to get the steri-strips to stick onto the wet skin. Obviously, you dry the skin, get the steri-strip ready to apply, press it onto one side of the wound firmly, and then applying a little bit of tension, pull it towards the other side, so you pull the skin edges together. Of course, several times the steri-strips would pull off and then you have to start again, and being an octopus in this situation would have been really handy because you need lots and lots of arms. So it was extremely handy having a nurse to help, getting the steri-strips out, applying them, keeping them firm while I pulled the other end, and together we progressively worked our way down the wound. We did this from the wrist and headed towards the fingers, and this was purely because it was easier for us, as the direction you close the wound does not matter. However, by the time we got to the web with the laceration that was jagged, I expected this to be much harder because the skin is loose and soft. But using diagonal tapes over both sides, we finally got the wound closed. We then applied a non-stick dressing over the top and wrapped it firmly with an elasticated bandage to apply external compression, which helps to hold the skin edges together as well as pressing the steri-strips firmly onto the skin. The other benefit with this is that it immobilizes the fingers, so Bridie couldn't move her fingers, as this would cause the wound to separate again and potentially pull off the steri-strips. As nurses are the experts in dressings and bandaging, our young nurse did a superb job in wrapping it all up and making it look smart from the outside. So thanks very much for her assistance through this whole process. In all, it took about an hour, but happily by the time we had finished, Bridie's symptoms of shock had resolved, the bleeding had stopped, and the pain had mostly resolved, and she was able to raise a smile and start to make plans about what to do next. This wound needed stitches because it was such a deep wound, and it was also an area where there would be a lot of movement. So during the healing process, the skin edges need to be held together very firmly, and having stitches would allow her to use her hand again without any risk of the skin edges pulling apart. So what's your name?
Bridie.
Okay, how did you do this?
I slipped on the rock.
Well, it's all better now.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So they went back to their own boat and immediately pulled up their anchor and headed towards the nearest port.
Congratulations on being such an amazing team, by the way.
Bye.
Bye.
Sometime later we got feedback from the hospital after she had had her stitches performed, and the doctors there were very happy with the wound that was clean and well held together.
So it was a good team that and didn't even dirty the boat. That's how clean it was.
While you can get the medical grade skin glue, super glue does work just as well. The key here, guys, make sure you have up-to-date super glue on your boat if you're going to be falling and cutting yourself.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and thanks to our awesome Patreons whose money helps us save lives around the world. Please make sure you subscribe and ding the bell so you don't miss out on any of the exciting upcoming episodes. Hold on to your dreams because, like the wind in the sails, they propel you towards endless possibilities.